So I want to talk about Noah. One of the reasons why I think it's so important to talk about Noah is because Noah, there's a lot to unpack, a lot to understand about, let's say, Noah as an archetype. And I think that there's a lot that you and I can learn for our lives from Noah. So I want to start off today with an old Jewish anecdote. It's about the former Secretary of State of the United States, Henry Kissinger, and he decides that he's going to make himself a custom-made, beautiful three-piece suit, and he's going to use the finest material. So during his next trip to Italy, he has himself measured by a world-renowned designer, and he gives him the material for his suit. And when he arrives in Paris, he presents the material to a skilled tailor. And the man measures his body and says, I'm really sorry, Mr. Kissinger, but a man your size needs at least another 2 inches of material. Surprised, Dr. Kissinger continues his journey to London. And the tailor there says, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary of State, but to turn this suit into a suit for your physique, I need another 3 inches of material. Now he's disappointed. He arrives in Beijing, and there's a widely acclaimed Chinese tailor, and he says, I really don't understand what you were thinking, Mr. Kissinger. Your body is far larger than this material. We need another 5 inches. Now, Dr. Kissinger is really upset. He goes to Tel Aviv. He presents the material to a Jewish tailor in Tel Aviv. The tailor measures him and says, you actually don't need so much material. It's too much material. I'll cut off some of it and we'll turn the remainder of it into something else. Now Kissinger is astonished. He turns to the Tel Aviv tailor and he says, can you explain this to me? I traveled the world and everybody claims I need much more material. What's going on here? So the Israeli tailor smiles and he says, it's quite simple. In Italy, you're a big man. In Paris, you're even a bigger man. In London, you're a great man. In Beijing, you're a giant. But in Israel, you're a small man. I really think that this anecdote is exactly how I would describe Noah. Noah is debatably from definitely the top 5 figures in the Bible. He single-handedly saves civilization. And what the tailor told Kissinger is what we actually did to poor Noah. We cut him down half his size, which is both astounding and problematic. So I'll explain what I'm talking about. The Torah says in the opening of this week's Torah portion, this is the history of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was wholesome in his generation, and Noah walked with God. That's what we know about Noah. The last week's Torah portion gave us a line that he was born, and now we know that he's a righteous man. The Talmud and Rashi ever sensitive to nuance, take note of the fact that the words in his generation are superfluous. What do you mean? He was a righteous man and he was wholesome in his generation. What do you think? He lived in a different generation? Why does it say in his generation? And obviously, he lived and he functioned in his generation. So why could the Torah not say simply, Noah was a righteous man, wholesome he was, and Noah walked with God? Now remember, from our perspective, there's not one word in the Torah that is extra. And so the fact that it uses an extra word, there must be a meaning behind it. And the Talmud actually gives two opposing explanations. The Talmud says, and I want to just bring up the quote from the Talmud here. It's a Talmud in Sanhedrin. The Talmud says the following. Among the sages, there are those who interpret this as praise of Noah. If he was righteous in his corrupt generation, certainly he would have been even more righteous had he lived in a generation of righteous people. Now, others interpret it negatively. In relation to his wicked generation, he was righteous. Had he been in a different generation, a more righteous generation, he would have not amounted to anything. Two opposing views. Either if he could do this in his generation, imagine how great he really was, or he was actually not very righteous, but because he was in a wicked generation, it looked like he was righteous. Who was Noah? Who was Noah? That's my question. Was he really a man of extraordinary stature, or just a cut above the rest? Did God save him because he was a perfect tzaddik? He was perfectly righteous? Or did God save him because there was nobody better? I'm sure you see where I'm going now, because I think this question is a question that we have to constantly ask ourselves, and a question that we need to ask ourselves, especially this week. It's amazing that the Torah portion happens this week and not last week and not next week. I think there's something disturbing about this discussion, because the Torah clearly is trying to highlight Noah's virtue. The Torah says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of God. So that's how the previous portion concludes. And then all of a sudden, we say in the opening of this week's Torah portion, this is the history of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was wholesome in his generation, and Noah walked with God. Later in the portion, God says to Noah, I have found you righteous before me in this generation. And God is clearly trying to extol Noah. I think what drove some rabbis to denigrate him and say that relative to other generations, he would amount to nothing special is, besides, when you can choose to a complementary interpretation or a complementary perspective, what drives some to choose a negative or a condescending interpretation? It runs against the Torah to give benefit the Torah to give people the benefit of the doubt. What's more is Noah is the only person in the entire Tanakh who was called a tzaddik. I'm sure you've heard this word before. A tzaddik means a perfectly righteous individual. God tells Noah, I have found you to be a tzaddik, perfectly righteous before me in this generation. And we, the Jews, say, yeah, but not really. Now, there are many, many interpretations, because it doesn't really make sense, this negative versus positive understanding. And there are many different interpretations. My favorite is one that was presented by the Rebbe in 1964. And the Rebbe said that not only were the rabbis not trying to minimize Noah's virtues, they actually wanted to highlight his praises even more. Equally important, they were trying to teach us all, I think, a transformative lesson. What did Noah accomplish? He saved all mankind. In the absence of Noah, humanity would have become extinct soon after it has begun. So single-handedly, he ensured the continuity of life on earth. He's the man who built an ark. He rescues all living organisms and ensures that our world would survive. I would say that's an achievement if there was ever an achievement. And who is the individual who achieves this feat? Who is the person who actually is able to do this? A person called by the Torah a man of the earth. The only story the Torah tells us about Noah, outside of constructing the ark and spending a year in it during the great flood, is that he was a farmer. He planted a vineyard and he became intoxicated and things happened. That's all. The last thing we hear about him is that he's drunk in the tent. The rabbis deduce from that text that Noah also was of those people who were wanting in faith. He believed and he didn't believe that the flood would come. And he would not enter the ark until the waters forced him to do so. So here's Noah. He's a fine man. He lived a decent, moral life. He tried to do what God wanted, but was not without flaws. He wasn't without doubts. He wasn't without struggles. I mean, if you compare him to some of the greats, compare him to Abraham, he would not amount to much. But look at what this simple guy achieved. In a society dripping with greed, with temptation, he held on to his morals. He walked with God. He swam against the tide. He saved the planet from destruction. Civilization survived not because of a towering figure, but because of a simple person who had the courage to live morally when everyone around him behaved despicably. So, by degrading Noah and stating that in other generations Noah would be eclipsed, I think the rabbis turn him into the most inspiring figure, someone who serves as a model for all of us, ordinary people. When I think of Noah, Noah's my hero because Noah becomes the hero of the ordinary, cut-of-the-mill, just regular person who's no great thinker, who's no great warrior, who's no great leader, who's no man of transcendence. So many of the people who we look up to, they're people who we could never be. I think that's what Homer tried to do. You know, Odysseus, right? There's no way you can ever touch these mythological figures. And the world since Homer has kind of reveled in mythological figures that we could never be. Noah is just an ordinary person. Noah's the me and you. And so the rabbis, by explaining the biblical text the way they did, I think they turn Noah into a symbol for us, for the ordinary people, the people who appreciate a nice cup of wine and maybe a little kichel, a little rugala. And that's you and me. We can make a difference in people's lives. So if I'm looking at this picture, I believe the message of Noah is life-changing, that you don't need to be an Abraham or a Moses to transform the world. Noah's just another kid on the block. And look what he did. With your own courage, not to toe the line of corruption, of falsehood, of fake, with a little gentleness, friendliness, with a little compassion, with a little kindness, you can save lives. You can ignite sparks. You can create an ark of sanctity amidst a raging flood. Noah's not a saint. And I would say, thank goodness, because I've heard about saints in my life. But I want to know about real people, people who struggle, people who have fear, who have doubt, who have pain. Tell me about someone whose IQ is not 180. The person who wasn't the valedictorian in school. The person who didn't become a Rhodes Scholar. Who wasn't a tycoon, who wasn't a best-selling author. Someone who wasn't a guru or a holy person. Who wasn't the greatest warrior, the greatest thinker, the greatest artist, the greatest leader. Just somebody trying to do the right thing when everyone around them has descended to greed, to apathy. And look what he accomplished. So in the presence of great moral giants, he may be eclipsed. That's what the Talmud says. Standing near Abraham, he would appear insignificant. And that's exactly what made him so significant. He set a standard for all of us who appear in our own eyes as insignificant. There's a great rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak Hunter. He was the dean of the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva. He's a great author. He wrote a book, I think, if I remember correctly, it's called Pachad Yitzchak. And he wrote a letter and he laments about the biographies that are published on the lives of Jewish leaders, of rabbis. And he says they are cookie cutter biographies in which every one of them was born a holy genius. And at the age of 6, they knew the entire Torah by heart. And at the age of 12, they mastered the Talmud, and the mother had to force them to eat because they wouldn't eat because all they were doing was studying all day. And in these biographies, he says there's no trace of struggle, of failure, of doubt, of anxiety, of temptation, of confusion, of adversity, of the path towards individual self-discovery. Besides, it's a dishonest portrayal. It deprives the biographies of having educational value. How can I emulate a flawless and brilliant saint? This is an educational mistake, I think, to see spiritual success in the absence of struggle and the repression of authentic emotions. Look at Noah. Noah's a flawed man, and he saved the world. I'm sure you've heard this story before, but I think about this story with regards to Noah, that the old story of a man that was walking along the beach and it's littered with thousands of starfish. They had been washed ashore in the high tide. And as he walked, he came upon a young girl. And she was eagerly throwing the starfish back into the ocean one by one. And the man is puzzled. What is this girl doing? Without looking up from his task, he says, why? Why are you doing this? And the girl simply says, I'm saving the starfish. The old man laughed. Young woman, he says, there are tens of thousands of starfish and only one of you. What difference can you make? The little girl picks up a starfish. She gently tosses it into the water, turning to the man and says, it made a difference to that one. So today, I think we should try and decide to emulate Noah, a simple man who was true to his soul, who was true to his God. And in our own way, stand up to the lies and stand up to the greed and become a symbol of light, a symbol of love, a symbol of hope. Make an ark where others can find shelter from the flood of pain, from the flood of, of insanity, the mental health. And we should stop giving excuses that we're just a regular person, that we're just minding your own business. Because I think that if we look at Noah, we can all be Noahs. We all have the ability within ourselves to find the ordinary, and from the ordinary to rise and become extraordinary. Hashem should bless us all, that we should have the ability and the strength to be able to be that simple person amidst a world that is flooded with so many things that don't make any sense. And we should have the courage and the ability to stand strong and to be the Noah. And it's amazing that Noah is our person this week, because it wasn't last week and it's not next week. And this is the week that we need Noah.